Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 175. So today we are going to talk about the vibration of 5D. What is the vibration of 5D? I'm going to tell you a little bit about where this came from, and I've got just a really short story to share today. And then for those of you in the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary, we are going to do a fairly long meditation today. There's going to be more focus on the meditation. If you would like access to that and all the other meditations we do as part of the show, access to the bonus episodes of the podcast, other exclusive content, and interaction with like-hearted individuals, you can join the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary, soon to be called the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. I just haven't had time to go in and change all the wording yet. There is a link in the show notes for that. So the energy this last week has been extremely intense, to say the least. And it has been intense this entire year. I started talking last year in the middle to like August-ish of last year, talking about how we were preparing for this huge activation that started in the middle of this year, started around May or June. And at the time, I was talking about how it was going to have the power of 40 full moons. That has just ramped up and up and up since then. The energy has been increasing in intensity. There has been more energy coming in. If you follow the Schumann resonance, which is this kind of resonance of the earth, it's a way that we can track the cosmic energy that's coming in. When we have solar flares, we have a huge amount of cosmic energy. The sun is in this peak cycle this year, so we've had a lot of those solar flares coming in. There's been a lot of intense cosmic energy coming in. We, of course, always have our individual energy cycles, but the cosmic energy affects everyone. It affects the collective. It affects us on individual levels. And it has been increasingly intense this entire year, ramped way up in May or June, and it just keeps kind of ratcheting up. And that is reflected by a lot of the chaos that we do see in the collective, a lot of the density. And this is this invitation of moving from the 3D into the 5D that we've been talking about for essentially almost the last year on the show. I wasn't using that terminology at first. Now it's just a shorthand. If you want to know more about that, there's an episode called What's the Deal with the 3D 5D Timeline Split. Go back and listen to that. We're going to talk more about what the vibration of these is, and you'll get a sense for, if you've never listened to me before, you'll get a sense for what we're talking about through what I'm talking about today with vibration. And so I've been seeing some things on social media this week about the intensity of the energy. And whenever people are talking about energy and vibration, this topic always comes up about low vibe versus high vibe. I've talked about that a lot on the show. We're going to talk about that a little bit today in terms of this 3D to 5D shift. And what is this, and how do so-called low and high vibes fit into that? What is the actual vibration of 5D? And actually, the really short answer to that is the vibration of 5D is all vibrations. The 5D is all-inclusive. It includes all vibrations. But there's a nuance in there that's really important that we're going to talk about in terms of this shift that we are being called into. It's an internal shift. It can only be done by you in your own field, but it is a physical shift. It is a vibrational expansion. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about this low vibe versus high vibe thing, because actually this is a really good way to explain what is the 3D, what is the 5D, what is the difference, and how do we shift. We're going to talk about that, of course, because it doesn't do us any good to talk in the abstract without some practical tools to make things happen for us. So in this kind of spirituality community, there is a lot of terminology that people use where they talk about something being low vibe or something being high vibe. High vibe being aspirational, being good, low vibe being kind of bad. And right away, I've always had an issue with this as a sound healer, and I've talked about this before, because we want all the vibrations. If you listen to your favorite song with the bass turned all the way down, no low vibrations, it doesn't sound quite right. Something is missing. The bass is the foundation of sound in music. When you, from classical, whatever kind of music you're listening to, the bass is the foundation. The low vibration is the foundation of vibration. The earth vibrates at a low vibration. So this idea that low vibes are bad from a physics standpoint is just untrue. It's not true from a vibrational sound perspective. And it's always kind of bothered me. And then recently, in the last few days, as I've been kind of seeing these things on social media and thinking about this, I realized another reason why this does not resonate and how this has to do with the 3D to the 5D. So the 3D, we've been talking about this for the last several weeks, especially. The 3D is duality. It is the either or. It is yes or no. It is good or bad, light or dark, high or low. The 3D hierarchical structure is a judgmental space. So just by saying, I want high vibes and not low vibes, you are in a 3D space of judgment. Full stop. That is one of the things I think about this that has really bothered me for a long time, that I've maybe not been able to articulate, is this idea that something is good and something is bad. That is not a 5D all-inclusive way of thinking. So this idea of low vibe versus high vibe is actually a really good illustration of the hierarchical structure of the 3D, which is this kind of laddered structure where something's at the bottom and then we work our way up and then something's at the top. So in this idea would be the low vibes are at the bottom and then we're going to raise our vibration and then we're going to get to this high vibration and then we're going to be better than we were before. There is so much judgment in that it is inherently not 5D. That is a 3D hierarchical structure imposed on vibration. So the 5D is the yes and. The 5D is all inclusive. The 5D includes all vibrations. We want low vibrations. We want middle range vibrations. We want high vibrations. We want a well-structured and stacked, balanced field of vibrations. If we have all high vibrations, we are completely ungrounded. And there are a lot of people in the spiritual community that are completely ungrounded. And that actually doesn't serve us. In this physical realm, that does not serve us because we are in a physical space. So we need balanced vibrations. We talked about this a lot last week when we talked about the dark feminine and this idea of balancing dark and light, balancing male and female, balance. So one of the words you could think about for 5D is that we want all the vibrations. We want our vibrations to be in balance. But there's a nuance here about the quality of the vibration, and even that word is a little bit judgmental, and I'm not a big fan, but I had to pick some sort of a descriptor so that I wasn't just completely in the abstract here. But let's talk just briefly about, before we get into even talking about the quality of the vibrations, we're going to talk about the most important thing here. And when we're shifting out of the 3D into the 5D, we're shifting out of this sort of judgmental space into this all-inclusive space. But having all the vibrations can be very overwhelming. When we get a lot of intense energy coming in, it can be really overwhelming. And so the nuance here that's really important is that all of the vibrations exist. We are going to choose to focus on the vibrations that are clear, expanded, and harmonious. So I've been using those three words for probably 3 years now. There's a whole show I did where I talked about that. I think it was something about the true meaning of healing. And I talked about kind of moving out of judgment and moving into this more inclusive space. I don't think I was using that languaging at the time, but I talked about how I don't even like the word healing because in the 3D, healing implies curing. And healing is not always curing. Sometimes healing is acceptance. Sometimes healing is dying. Sometimes healing can be all of the things. And so I started using the words clarity, expansion, and harmony. So in the 5D, we have all the vibrations. We want all the vibrations to be there. But it can be very overwhelming to have all of those vibrations. And so we choose to focus on these vibrations that feel more expanded, that feel more harmonious, that feel clearer. And that in turn actually allows us more space. And right away, we're back to the analogy I use all the time when I talk about vibration and energy, which is this idea of taking the rubber bouncy ball. If you take a rubber bouncy ball into a tiny closet and you throw it, it's going to go bing, 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 and it's going to bounce all around, and that feels like chaos. So when you're in a small space physically, but we're talking in the quantum here, so when there is less space in your energetic field, physically, this is a physical phenomena, even though we're talking about energy that most people can't see. When we get a huge influx of energy, like we have been this whole year, we get that bing, 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 and it tends to be experienced as chaos, as anxiety, as feeling really overwhelmed, because all the vibrations are there, but there's not a lot of space for them to move around. And it's hard to focus. How am I going to pick one bounce of that ball to focus on when it's moving back and forth so quickly? It's really hard to focus on certain vibrations that would allow you to feel clearer, more harmonious, and more expanded when you're in this really constricted space. So if you take that same rubber bouncy ball into the stadium and you throw it, it's not even going to come back to you. So one of the shifts here that is a physical shift from 3D to 5D is making more space in your energetic field, having more physical quantum energetic space in your physical quantum energetic body, so that when all of the vibrations come in, you're not immediately overwhelmed by the bing, 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 bing of that ball in your closet. You're in the stadium. And so in that stadium, you could choose to focus on the ball. You could have 15 other people all throwing their balls around in the stadium, and you might not even connect. You might not even see somebody if they're on the other side of the stadium. So the more space you have, the more opportunity you have to focus on the vibrations that feel like they are serving your highest good. And that is where this idea of kind of the quality of vibrations comes in. And I'm using the word quality here to describe how the vibrations are experienced, because I'm really trying hard to keep us out of that 3D judgmental space of this idea, let's say, of low versus high. In the 5D, all of the vibrations exist. We want access to all of the vibrations, but we might choose to focus on vibrations that allow us to feel more clear, more expanded, and more harmonious, because that allows us to rest in this space of inclusivity, to rest in a space of non-judgment, or come closer to it. I'm not sure that as humans we're ever going to totally get there. So when I talk about quality of vibrations, we're talking about, when people talk about low vibe, I think what they really mean is this idea of muddy vibes, vibes that aren't clear, disharmony, although what in classical music is considered dissonance or disharmony actually serves us. We call them now, in the healing community, we call it binaural beats. So all of this is a matter of perspective and focus. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is that the vibration of 5D is all the vibrations, but your focus, your internal experience, reflects in the external field around your body and allows you to experience either contraction and discomfort or expansion. And the opposite of discomfort, I think, is expansion, expansion and expansion, expansion and bliss and joy, and all of the things that we sort of associate with the term that sometimes people call high vibe. So how do we shift? How do we shift our focus? Because all of the vibrations are here. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about kind of what happened to me this week. And we're going to talk about how to shift those vibes. And then in the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary, I'm going to actually walk you through a really powerful meditation that I used to shift my own vibes this week that I've been tapping into. So it can be really difficult to shift our focus. Our brains are wired to take shortcuts. We've talked about this in the past. We have these neural pathways that we wire in our brains. And it's basically, if you think about it, it's like taking the same route to school every day. Just going to walk the same way. I'm going to walk the same way. I've decided this is the most efficient and I'm just going to do this. So it can be really difficult to shift our focus because it's actually hardwired into our brain at a certain point to focus. I was brought up in a space to focus on contracted vibrations, what some people might call negative vibrations, or muddy, less harmonious, kind of contracted vibrations. And I'm going to focus here because I don't want to have to keep saying all three words, because the big shift here is from contraction to expansion. Once we have more space, we literally have more space to process the energy that's coming in. So we've had this really intense energy coming in this week. Some people are experiencing that as chaos and overwhelm and that feeling of kind of anxiety. Some people are experiencing that as activation and inspiration and this feeling that we are turning a corner as humanity and we are stepping into more love and more expansion. The vibrations that are coming in are exactly the same. It is our focus on them. And the other day I did a TikTok where I said it felt like there were two totally separate streams of energy coming in. And I think they were split in that way in order to help us train our focus. We can retrain our brains to focus on something other than they have been focused on. So if we've been focused as a society for all of these years on more contracted vibrations, on that duality, us versus them, yes versus no, right versus wrong, light versus dark, high versus low, all of those things, that duality separates us. And when we are separate, when we are not balanced, first of all, we get out of balance because we're saying high is good and low is bad. So we're avoiding low, and then we get out of balance. So that's the first way that doesn't serve us. The other thing is, when we are focused in duality, we are separated, there is less space. So think about this idea of, in duality, I'm talking about the bouncy ball in the closet. Let's stick with that. There's two separate closets. If I put those closets together and knock the wall down between them, I have a much larger space. So when we are focused in the 3D, it splits our focus. That is like what duality is. We're focused on this or that, right or wrong, yes or no, one or the other. It's two separate closets with a big wall between them. When we move into the 5D, when we allow for all vibrations, when we let go of the judgment, instantaneously we allow for more space in our field. So as this intense cosmic energy comes in, if we are in that 3D focus, that old neural wiring that tells us something is good, something is bad, something is right, something is wrong, when these huge undifferentiated vibrations come in, energy is energy. This is just energy coming in. It is our judgment of it. The way that we receive this energy is what happens in our system. So when we're focused on the duality, and we're automatically, by focusing on duality, we're putting ourselves into a more contracted space, we're essentially stepping into the small closet. And so the energy comes in and it's like bounce, 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 blah, 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 and it's really overwhelming and intense. Just by shifting our focus to this idea that there is not a duality, that duality does not serve us. There is duality in this space, but this idea that like the duality can be there and we can move beyond it. We can expand beyond it. We can say, I'm not going to say low is worse than high or high is worse than low. I'm going to allow the low and high to be there, and I'm going to step out of that into non-judgment. Right away, we make more space. It's like we've knocked down the wall between the closets and we're in a bigger space. And right away in a bigger space, the energy that comes in is going to feel less overwhelming. There's going to be more opportunity to allow that energy to serve us, to activate us, to increase our expansion, to increase these less dense, less contracted emotions that we want to focus on in order to retrain our brains, our neural pathways, to focus on those things more often. And eventually we get to the point where we train ourselves to focus on that expansion more of the time. Probably never all of the time, but more of the time. And the way that we shift this, because that's really difficult, first we have to notice it. You have to have awareness, right? First step in spiritual processing, awareness. You have to know what's going on. Second step, mental processing. You have to understand it in the mental space. That's what I've been doing this week. That's why I'm presenting this to you. And then we step into the emotional processing, which is working this into the body. How do we experience this shift? Because it doesn't do it. I mean, it does do us good to understand it, but if we never take that step into the actual experience, then sometimes it's almost worse, because it's like we're trapped in contraction and we don't know how to get out of it. We know we want to get out of it, but we don't know how to get there. So how do we get there? That's where my story comes in. But I want to say just a few things about other tools we've used in the past for this, because some of you are not going to be accessing the meditation, and I don't want to just be like, here's how to do it and good luck. There's no help for you. Focusing on expansive emotions is how we shift this. So gratitude. I did a show a long time ago called Finding the Sweetness in Life. That was kind of a gratitude. We've talked a lot on the show about pleasure. So if you're looking to go back and you want to do one of the free meditations in the first 157 or however many episodes have the meditations included, look for Finding the Sweetness in Life. Look for anything that says pleasure in the title. Play. Stepping into play. We have created this weird 3D society where it's not acceptable for adults to play, or it's only acceptable in these really weird, narrow versions that a lot of times involve substances that actually don't tend to serve to expand us. A lot of times they contract us more. If you watch little kids and they're just running around on a playground having fun, free form, there's no rules. There's some rules, don't hurt somebody, try not to hurt yourself, but like they're just running around and it looks really chaotic. They're all in this vibration of play, of expansion, of just exploring their bodies and letting them move. We don't really do that as adults. So tapping into a vibration of play is another thing. So if you're looking to go back and do any meditations from earlier shows, look for shows about pleasure, look for shows about gratitude, sweetness, play, anything like that is really going to serve you to shift. Now I'm going to tell you my story of kind of a new way I found to shift recently that really served me in this last week with all this intense energy coming in. So I recently went to the Global Crystal Bowl Symposium in Cambodia. I've been talking about that the last few weeks. Before I went to that, I was reading the book Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza. And it's funny when I say his name, he's a very polarizing figure. You tend to get very 3D reactions to him. Very positive, like, yes, he's great, or very like, ooh, I don't like him reactions, which always in itself is interesting to me, because I think, again, it's all about focus. You can go in and not agree with everything someone says, not resonate with everything someone says, or even the way they say it, and you can still find valuable information, which I absolutely did. I actually didn't finish the book because I got it out of the library and had to return it. Sort of on my way to Cambodia, it was a digital copy. But in one of the very first chapters, he talks about, there's a meditation I think it's called Blessing the Energy Centers. And that word blessing really threw me for a loop. That's the first way I'll say it. It's not a word that I use. It's not a word, to me, it sounds like a religious word. It's a sacred word, and sacredness and religion are not the same thing. But because I have some religious baggage in the way I was raised in the Catholic Church, that word blessing, like to me, it sort of brings up these ideas of like rituals that I don't necessarily resonate with as an adult, that I experienced as a child. But something about that word, words have vibrations. Absolutely. I just mentioned a bunch of words that have expansive vibrations: gratitude, pleasure, joy, play. These are the words themselves have vibrations that can help shift our focus. So we're not trying to get rid of certain vibrations. We want all of the vibrations. It's okay to have the density in your field. And the most interesting thing is that when you shift your focus away from that density, the density itself often shifts without having the intention. But when we have an intention to shift something because we've been in this 3D space for so long, it almost always comes with this sort of shame and guilt and this idea that I'm doing something wrong or there's something wrong about me. Why am I not more grateful? There's something wrong with that. And right away, that contracts us. The judgment contracts us. So when we shift our focus away from trying to change something and just focusing on one of these like more expansive emotions, ideas, words, we shift into that 5D. So I'm not asking the density to shift. I'm focusing on the expansion. And as I focus on the expansion, what we focus on expands. What we give attention to persists. So when we focus on the expansion, we expand even more. And eventually we've expanded to the point where the density no longer even really affects us, or it doesn't feel dense, or it's such a tiny little thing that it just kind of goes away on its own. I had this really powerful energy session today, body work session, physical and energetic work session. And I was dealing with some really deep stuff. And in the past for me, sometimes that's a lot, right? There's trauma release that comes up and there's crying and there's like a lot of, it can be really intense. It can be a little bit overwhelming. And this was the gentlest session. I was laughing on and off throughout it. I was having huge amounts of release, but the focus was in a different space. Because I had much more expansion in my field going into this, there was more space for the energy to move. And as I focused on more and more expansion, that the tension in my body, the density, just sort of naturally shifted. And I didn't have to apply any force. Mentally, I was in the space mentally. The practitioner was doing things, but it was like this idea of, this came to me the other day, it's this idea in martial arts, if you've ever watched somebody doing like judo or something, somebody rushes at them, and instead of like rushing back or like trying to meet them with an opposite force in the other direction, they just use that person's momentum and kind of flip them over. Or they step out of the way and the person just like falls on their own. This is this idea of finding the expansion, finding the flow, focusing on a space that leads us into more expansion, oftentimes will completely dissipate the contraction, the density. So I was practicing this meditation. I had kind of already adapted it for myself because it's just written in the book, and I think you can buy an actual recording, and I am a professional meditator. I teach meditation, so I didn't feel it necessary to do that. I used what was in there. I took the vibration of that and the wording of that, especially this word bless, and I created my own meditation. And I was working with this as I was getting ready to leave for Cambodia, and I was feeling really amazingly expanded and really, really good, to the point that I actually didn't take medication for some of the flights that I was taking. I had 3 flights, 2 shorter flights and 1 longer flight. And I have a lot of fear around flying. Long story we don't need to go into. It's motion sickness, claustrophobia, and crowds all together in one little tin can. It's just a lot for me. There's a lot of energy in the space. And I found by practicing this meditation that was allowing me to focus on expansion, I was getting expanded to the point where like the fear was kind of still there, but it wasn't really affecting me. It was kind of like stepping out of the small closet and into the stadium. It was like, oh yeah, I can see, there's some fear coming up. My body has some fear, but I don't feel the need to kind of suppress it with medication. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Use what works. I used medication on the longer flight because the first one was 16 hours and on the way back it was 14 and a half. It's just an interesting shift to notice that just by practicing this meditation, I was allowing for so much more space in my system that density, that fear, that contraction was not affecting me in the way that it previously had. So I went to Cambodia. I was kind of practicing this meditation on my own. I had a lot of jet lag, so I was waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning, laying there for a few hours before I could get up. So I was like practicing this meditation and just really in this beautiful expanded space. And then the space that the symposium was holding was really expanded and amazing. And I got really into the sound stuff because that's what I was there for. And I kind of forgot about the meditation because I was really expanded. And I came back and I was really expanded and I was just feeling so amazing and so wonderful. It's like that honeymoon period. And then what happens, I did a whole show about this, about integration. Why is integration so hard? So you expand, and then there's this period of like accommodating for that expansion. I've used housing renovation metaphors or analogies for that before. It's that idea of like, man, I'm going to knock down the wall between the kitchen and the living room because I want more expanded space. And then you knock it down, and then it's like a hot mess. And there's this integration period of like, did I make the right decision? And this is weird, and it doesn't feel like my house, and there's construction people everywhere, and is this ever going to get done? And so all of this stuff comes up before we can really integrate and synthesize and then enjoy the expansion. And then eventually the job is done and we're like, oh, this is beautiful. This is exactly what I wanted. But along the way, there's the integration that can sometimes feel really difficult. So I got home, I had this big, beautiful kind of honeymoon period. And then it was like, I'm thinking of that old song, back to life, back to reality. You know, it's like you're in this really beautiful expanded space, kind of on a little bit of a vacation and self-care and learning. And then it was like I came home and it's like life is still life, and I have to figure out how to life again, how to people again from the space of more expansion. But it's a little bit like coming back to the house and finding that the living room wall's been knocked down and you're not exactly sure what's happening. And then in the meantime, all of this really intense energy came in, and I got to a space where I was feeling really contracted earlier this week. And then all the 3D stuff around that came up, all the judgment of like, what, you went over there and you were so expanded, and did you do all that for nothing? And now you're in this really contracted state. What does that do? That contracts us more because we're focusing on the 3D. We're focusing on the contraction or the fear or whatever it is. And then I've had some other stuff I've been dealing with energetically for my own personal field, may come up in another show. But all of that had me really feeling really contracted. And so I woke up at 4 a.m. a couple nights ago, and I was like in this really contracted state of discomfort. I had a lot of fear. I was just like, I don't understand what happened. How did I get from that like beautiful expanded space back into this really contracted space? And all of a sudden I remembered this meditation about blessing the energy centers. And I was like, oh, well, that's easy. I can just do this meditation. I don't know if it's going to help, but I'll just go through this. I'm awake. I clearly wasn't going back to sleep. And I'm like, this is an easy way for me to just give my mind something to focus on, is what I was thinking. But what I really did by doing that was I gave my mind a much more expanded space to focus on by blessing each of my energy centers. And there is something about that word bless that goes beyond things like gratitude. Because gratitude sometimes, there's sort of a spectrum here that I'm seeing all of a sudden now of this, like a lot of times we talk about acceptance. And I've talked about surrender on the show, and sometimes the line between surrender and just giving up and frustration is really thin. So acceptance is kind of like, I'm not sure I like this, but I guess I accept it. There's like resistance still in there, right? And then there's like the gratitude maybe, is a little more expanded. It's like, that was really difficult, but I have some gratitude for being able to get through it, or whatever it is, for being on the other side of it. So there's a little more expansion in there. But expanding out, and then there's pleasure, which is even more expanded than gratitude. Like, I'm grateful for this, and I actually really enjoy it. It feels really good to me. But this word bless that I initially was like, had like a little bit of baggage around, it's a sacred word. So not only do I accept this and find a little bit of gratitude and maybe have some pleasure, I bless this, whatever it is, the situation, this part of my body. And when we begin to bless these kind of things that maybe, like one of the things I was doing when I was on the plane, I was blessing my fear. And that's not something that I've ever done before. We've talked about accepting fear. We've talked about making friends with fear, like treating your fear like a baby animal, trying to love the fear. I've never blessed the fear. And the word bless, there's a sacred vibration in that word, even though it took me a little while to get over my stuff, and that can happen. And if you have another word that you feel like works better, absolutely, it's always going to be more powerful. But when you acknowledge the sacred in all of the vibrations, you are instantly taking yourself out of the 3D realm of judgment and into the 5D realm of inclusion. It's not only like, I hate this fear, I'm going to accept it, but I hate it. It's like, I bless this fear. And there's a little bit of the act as if in there. There's a little bit of the like, but what I found practicing this meditation was that there was way less of that than I thought there would even be. By starting out kind of just blessing my energy centers, blessing my energetic field, and then moving out to these bigger things, I bless my fear. I bless my resistance. So the other night I woke up, it was 4 a.m. I couldn't fall back to sleep. I was like, well, I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to shift out of this. Like all the judgment was coming up about, I'm supposed to be holding this big space and blah, 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 and like me. And it was like, when we contract, what's happening is we're falling back into that old neural pathway of focusing on something that's contracted rather than something that is expansive, of focusing on the either or rather than the yes and. So I was like, well, I don't know. I'm just going to do this meditation. It just came to me and I was like, all right. So I started with this meditation. I was going through blessing my energy centers and like feeling the energy move. And pretty soon, then I was in this really beautiful expanded space from which I was able to bless my fear. So I started blessing my fear. I've been working with this childhood fear. I started blessing my resistance because that's something that's really frustrating for me. And we all have it. It's part of the process. We want to shift, even if it's just our focus, and part of us resists that. Those neural pathways in our brain get worn down to the point that it's like we're in a trench. If your trench is deep enough, you cannot even see that it's a trench. It just feels like you're in this narrow space, right? And so when we fall into that pit, when we fall back down into the trench, like I was in a space like, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know how I got down here. I don't know how I got into this contracted space. And I don't remember how to get back out. And so I was like, well, I remember the meditation and I just started going through it. And the further I got into this meditation, what I'm actually doing is essentially levitating my way out of the trench into a space that is much more expanded. So it was a complete shift for me. It brought this huge amount of expansion and it completely changed my focus. It didn't change the vibrations. The vibrations are still there. The intense vibrations are still coming in. By changing my focus, by allowing for more expansion, I was able to remember that I am expanded because my field is really expanded. I've done a lot of work on that. So even when I fall into that little trench of neural pathway walking, the expanded field is still there. I just have to remember that it's there and refocus myself and get to a space where I can be focused. And it was a huge shift and it helped me understand, again, it's not about the vibrations themselves because vibrations are vibrations. We want all the vibrations. It's about where our focus is. It's about shifting out of that judgment of the either or, that 3D duality, and into this all-inclusive. In the 3D reality, fear is bad. Resistance is bad. And just the word bad starts bringing up shame, and then that brings up more fear, and then that brings up more resistance. And it's like this vicious cycle. So just by saying, I bless my fear, I come out of that duality and into this idea that all vibrations are welcome in my space. I bless all of my vibrations. Whew. The whole top of my head is tingling. When we bless all of our vibrations, everyone, think about what happens when someone compliments you and you're actually able to receive it, or someone says something really nice to you. It makes you feel good. So when I bless my fear has the opportunity to expand. I am including it as part of this holistic experience of being human. I'm taking myself out of the judgment. So, if you would like to access the amazing meditation that I'm going to share with the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary today, you can click on the links in the show notes. All of the previous meditations are there in these groups. You have the opportunity to interact with like-hearted individuals and to access other exclusive content, we would love to have you join us. You are a being of unconditional love, and by blessing these parts of yourself, all the parts of yourself, by accepting the duality as a part of this oneness that is unconditional love, you shift your focus out of that 3D duality and into the 5D expansion of unconditional love. That is the source of your being. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening. I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.